Hello ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Dave back here with you again. I'm in Tampa, Florida, and I came out here today to fully determined to bring a shovel and dig up some of the areas where I know that Frank Morse and the Anglin brothers buried the bodies of their Zodiac killer victims, of the victims that they murdered. And things have changed so much. Geez, I'm sitting in a parking lot of a building which I think they built the parking lot on top of one of the grave sites. But let me just get out and show you. This area right here could well be the spot, but it's been raining a lot and it's underwater, so I can't really do any digging here. I remember the area had a few pine trees in it. You can see there's one there and one there, one there. Over here a couple. These are small ones that probably wouldn't have been here 50 years ago, but they may have. I don't know how old that pine tree is right there, but there was a really big one over in this area. I mean, it was huge, and that was what I was going to use for my landmark, but I'm afraid it was out there in that parking lot. So, everything's underwater here. I'm not going to be able to dig anything. Well, let's go on and take another look somewhere else. So, my recollection, where we used to walk through from that church building over there to the store, would have been right about here down this road. And right in the middle of it, somewhere around behind my little white vehicle there, was where they buried what I figured was probably 20 bodies. We saw these guys carrying what looked like rolled up carpet in here several times. They would hold it under their arms, kind of like that. And sometimes it would just be two of them, sometimes it would be three. That's something back then I couldn't figure out why two people sometimes and why three. Well, I think it just depended upon how big the body was of their murder victim. Now, there's a little patch of brush here, kind of a swampy area, which used to be attached to the one that I showed you, but now this building that I showed you here on the side is in between. They put it really over the area where all the activity was going. But I'm going to go in here and just film a little bit of this swamp so you can take a look at it. This kind of swampy area was an area that we would play in, but not very much because it was usually underwater. Now, there was a place where the Anglin brothers and Frank Morse were staying in the woods over on the other side over there, and we're going to go take a look at that. And, I really believe that mass grave site was, that building over there is sitting on it right now, the building in the parking lot. We're going to drive around to the other side of this thing where the church is at and take another look at it. So stay with me. I'm standing on the road where I used to live here in Buffalo Estates. That's the house that I lived in. And that window, but around on the other side there's another window. It's where Junior used to come up and talk to me at night. And this is where Junior used to live. He'd just walk across the street here. And that's where the Zodiac killer approached him one time and copied the mask that he made for Halloween to try and scare me with. Now, the preacher's daughter lived right around the corner there. We're going to go over there and take a look. Well, I was hoping to take you down to the creek where I told you about the sawgrass patch. The sawgrass patch was on the other side, and there's a lot of houses there. We're going to have to drive around and see if we can get a better look at it. But there's a fence there, you can't get across the creek. Well, there's the creek, and I used to climb the bank and go across the other side and play in the field, and that was all woods and field back there. And this is the area where the Zodiac killer hung out, catching and killing kids. Now Sheila's body is buried along here somewhere on the other side of this fence, but I'm not sure which house it is now, so I can't I was going to put some flowers on her grave. What a terrible way for a girl to die. She was only 16. That was 50 years ago. One time I stood right here under this telephone pole, and I watched John Anglin standing right there giving signals to Clarence Anglin, who was down here, and he was going back and forth in between these houses and looking for things to steal. He went in that way and he came out with something that had something to do with a tractor, and they had a car right there, and John made a signal to him that I remembered, and I went and looked it up in the Navy signaling corps thing, and that signal meant, you know, all's clear and the mission is accomplished. And he was kind of smiling, and I think Frank brought the car around here and parked it over there, and they put their whatever they stole in the car. They all got in the car and they left. I remember saying something to John, because part of the signal is to drop your arm like this and swing it. And I remember laughing and telling him, "Hey man, you look like you got a broken arm." He looked at me like, of course, like he wanted to kill me. And then he took off down that way, and they got in the car and left. Now, they abducted a little boy who was they were cutting him up and drinking his blood. He had bandages all over him when I saw him, because he did manage to get away from them and somehow get back home. But they moved out of there, and the police told him, "Don't tell anybody where you're moving to." So she didn't tell me, and that was the last I ever saw of her. But he had bandages all over him where he had been cut up, and she said that they were drinking his blood. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were somewhat of vampires. And I came to the conclusion, I think I told you about this, people that are this kind of sick and they have a sexual desire for treating people this way and for death, that's more important to them than food. So these guys don't eat. So when they do get somebody bleeding, that's kind of a simple, quick, and easy food source, I guess. It's really bizarre, but this is the way it was with Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, who later became the Zodiac killers after they went to San Francisco. But this is where they started, here in Buffalo Estates. Well, actually, they started over on Minnehaha Street, but, you know, back in '47, Frank was doing it in Texarkana, the Moonlight Murders. But let's go around the corner. I've tried to look over and see if I could find that sawgrass patch, and it looks like they've built houses on it, but we're going to go around there and take a look. You know, today has become a big fail day. Everywhere I've gone is closed, and I'm not having any luck finding what I wanted to find, but as near as I can figure it, that sawgrass patch was somewhere right about in the middle of that road right there. Things have changed quite a bit around here, and I'm not going to get to show you what I wanted to show you. But I'm not finished yet, so stay with me. Now this is a park at the back of Kings Forest, which is a housing complex in front of Buffalo Estates. There used to be a pond out behind here where I saw Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers murder a kid. I thought they had a big fish. There were no fish in here. I've told you about it before, but I'm going to give you some more details. And they also almost caught me in here one time, and I'll give you some details on that. But let's go back there and see if we can find any bodies of water. The thing about it is the pond that was there, which was really kind of a big lake, was right about where that building is over there. And that building's been, I think, built over the area where the water was at. Well, I'm pretty sure there are some remnants of that pond somewhere, but it's not here, because the pond used to start off the end of the basketball court down in there somewhere, about where that building is at. But it was up here where this first tree is at. That was where the pond started, and it went that way. None of that's here anymore. We're standing out here. That's the tree that I showed you a while ago, and this is where the lake was at. And you can kind of see, if you look right here, that as you get right here, there's kind of a bank here, and then everything drops down because that's where the lake was. They filled it in, but they didn't fill it all the way up. And it went from about right there over to maybe where that telephone pole is at, and then it went straight on back. Would have been about twice as far as from here to that building. And down in that area, there were no trees there then, but there was brush along the side of it, kind of the way that brush is on that fence right there. And that's where they had that kid in the water, and they cut his throat in front of me and Junior, but they had him under the water and we couldn't see what they were doing. And the place where they would have attacked me, which was on a different day, I was over there, the bank went that way and I was playing on the bank, and they came from back that way. They would drive down, there was a road that went down here, and they'd drive down in the back and park, and they would come up here to catch kids. And I mean, these guys were really, they had this thing honed down to where they could get by with it anytime they wanted, and they were doing it daily. But I saw them coming, and I was there playing with a knife, and I figured, well, I need to let them see me play with it, so I was throwing the knife and sticking it in the ground, and as they got closer, I heard Frank tell John, well, it's just a little knife, and I could see John kind of swallowed because he didn't look like he wanted a knife fight with me. And like I said, the bank of the lake was right there, so I took off running from back there, and I dove into the lake, and I did this real pretty swan dive just to freak him out. And I heard Frank tell John, go in there and do a dive like he did, run and jump off that bank, show him that you can do what he did. And John was kind of limping anyway. He had that bad ankle that where he'd hurt himself getting out of Alcatraz, and he kind of limped down the bank and down to the shore. And as he was going, Frank was going, what are you doing? And he says, I'm going to dive from down here. And he kind of stumbled to the water and just about tripped and fell in. I think that ankle was really bothering him that day. I had swam all the way across the pond by then, and I was probably somewhere where that tree's at. And he jumped in about where that tree was at, and he started swimming after me. And I'm watching him swim, and I'm thinking, you know, this guy's not a very good swimmer. He was struggling to get across there. But now in retrospect, now that I'm a doctor and I've worked on a lot of ankles and knees and things, the guy was having problems with his ankle. That's why he couldn't swim very good. And he kept swimming across there anyway, and he got to the edge where I was at. There's a whole lot of hyacinths floating in the water over here on this edge. I can see where the edge of the pond started, and it drops down, but then they filled it in. And let's just go over there. Those hyacinths went to the edge of the pond, which was up in there somewhere, and they came out to about here, maybe 30 or 40 feet of hyacinths. And I swam underneath them and out into the middle, and I got in there where I could get air, and they couldn't see me. And John struggled his way over and got to the edge of the hyacinths. And Frank was walking around, taking his time, smoking his Raleigh cigarette. And he said, go in there and wrestle him out of there. And John looked in, and he was looking for me. And Frank was saying, I can see him, he's right there. And he was pointing to me, and I could see that he knew where I was at. I wasn't moving, but he saw the hyacinths move. So, you know, Frank was watching where I had moved the hyacinths, and he was directing John on how to find me. Well, John got real close to me. He was within 3 feet of me, and I had my knife out. I was laying there holding on to the hyacinths. I didn't have to kick or anything. And John looked right in my eyes. He was about maybe 3-4 feet away from me. And I just put that knife up in between us like that. And he saw it, and he turned, and he swam away. Now, he swam over to the bank over here. He swam along the hyacinths here and over to the bank. And by the time he got there, Frank had made it over to where he was at. And I remember there was something there, a can or something, and he sat down on it. And he told Frank, he says, no, my ankle's bothering me. And he went down here to his ankle, and he was doing some things, but I could see him, and I could tell he was motioning like this to his brother Clarence, because Frank had sent Clarence around over here to stop me in case I got out of the water and ran so that he could catch me. And Clarence, John, sitting there with Frank and sending signals to Clarence that Frank obviously didn't know about those signals, and I think that's how they stayed alive while living with this guy, was being able to communicate with each other with signals that he didn't know about. Clarence started walking over there, and he kept looking back right at where I was at, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. But now I'm thinking about it. They were trying to let me go because they didn't want to get in a knife fight with me. If you look there, you can see where the lake started. That was the bank. So I got out, swam under the hyacinths all the way to the edge right there, and I got out and I took off running. My shoes were over there. Clarence had looked in my shoes and to see if I had left anything there of value, I guess, that he was going to steal. And I grabbed my shoes and started putting them on so that I could run. And Frank's over here with John and Clarence. They all three got together, and Frank was really angry. He's going, man, he's getting away. God damn it, I want that kid. I want him dead. Sounded like Al Capone. And I took off running that way through the housing complex. And out to the front. Now they followed me, and they caught me up there again. I'm going to tell you about that. Now, if you look down the road there, that's the entrance to Buffalo Estates, where I used to live, and right in here is the entrance to King's Forest. And there's a second entrance right here. And there used to be a concrete wall along the creek right here. And I would pass this concrete wall on the way home from swimming in that pond. And there used to be a lot more water in here. You can see where I think there's some concrete still over there. That wall was right there, and it went over to the edge, and I would stand there, lean on the wall, and look down in at the creek and watch the fish when I was a kid. And that same day that they almost got me in the pond, instead of going straight home, I came over here, and I was standing by the pond looking down in there. Came over here to watch the fish swim in the creek, and they snuck up behind me. There weren't houses there back then. It was just this concrete wall and then the road over there. You know, it kind of amazes me how the police haven't approached me yet. I've been walking around this neighborhood and taking pictures and everything and filming. But you see, that's why Frank Morris chose this area to catch his victims, his prey as he called them. Because that was 50 years ago, and it was just like it is now. Not a lot of people would pay attention to you. You could get by with things, especially if you look like a kid walking around in the neighborhood. Those guys looked like they were, 19, 20 years old. They would take off their shirts, and they just looked like kids playing in the neighborhood. But anyway, over here behind this wall that I told you about where I used to watch the fish, I was there watching, and I just got this strange feeling somebody was sneaking up on me, and I looked, and here comes all three of them walking along that wall. And I had my bicycle there, and I got up to go. I was kind of bent over the wall, and I got up to grab the bike, and Frank tells John and Clarence, get that bike away from him. And they went for the bike, but I got to it first, and I had used this bike to keep dogs from biting me by getting off of it, grabbing the handlebars, and swinging the back tire around and hitting the dogs with it to get them to leave me alone. And I didn't do this very often. There was only a few dogs who were so mean that they just wouldn't leave me alone. Most of them I could get away from. And I took that bike, and somehow Frank got on the other side of me. John and Clarence were on the other side of me, and then the wall was over here, and I spun around and I swung that bike at John and Clarence, and John stepped back, and the look on his face told me, hey, we're not going to bother you, don't worry about it. And I spun around, and I took that bike, and I hit Frank Morris with it about 4 times, crossing like this. I hit one way and swing it around and come the other way. I practiced a lot with this, hitting trees with it. I was very good with it, very accurate. I could make the hits land where I wanted to. And I was hitting him in the arms because I didn't want to hurt him. Nice guy that I was. But I knew I could hit him in the face if I needed to. And I backed him off enough, and I looked out behind me, and I could see that John and Clarence weren't closing in on me. So I just took the bike, took off running, and jumped on the bike, and I rode home. Frank was just really livid with anger. He really wanted me. He wanted me bad. Another close call for Dr. Dave, and I got away and went home. It wasn't very long after that, he actually walked into my house with these guys, and I was sitting there with a gun. And that's another video.